Hello, and welcome to the official podcast of CallUponTheLord.com. My name's Corey Wigington, and this is episode 10. I want to welcome you back. This is my first podcast of the year, so hopefully we'll get off to a good start today. I hope you've enjoyed your Christmas and New Year's celebration. Hope they were enjoyable and exciting. I know mine was, so I wish the same for you. And hopefully in this new year we can kick off to a good start here with a good Bible study. If you haven't already decided on one, New Year's a great time to pick up a new Bible study and just get into God's Word and start learning things that you haven't seen before. So I encourage you to do that, and we'll go ahead and get started for the day. This week we're continuing on with our the Great Story series. We're on week 10 of that. This week we will be talking about David. And David is one of my favorite characters in the Bible. I could talk about David for a very, very long time. There's just so much in his life that shows how God uses people. It shows what happens when we don't trust God. It gives you kind of a view of the Messiah, because the Messiah was from the root of David. I mean, there's just so much in the story of David and his life and in the kingdom of Israel at that time that it's very difficult to cover it all. So what we're doing here, we're splitting David actually into two separate weeks. I know that sounds painful. It's really not. We're splitting him into 2 weeks, though. So the first week we're going to study the beginnings of his life, basically the time when he was young, anointed the king, till the time when Saul dies. And then next week we'll be looking at how David ruled his kingdom and the good and the bad things that happened there. And then the week after that we'll be on to Solomon. So 2 weeks for David. Like I said, that's still not enough time to do it. 2 hours to discuss this man is not nearly enough. I have 4 pages in my study guide this week, and I had to cut out many of the side details that I would have liked to discuss. But we're going to hit the heart of it, and I think we'll learn some things along the way. So let's go ahead and get started here. We discussed last week about Samuel and about the rise of Saul, about how Samuel was a judge. People had rejected him and said, "We want a king placed over us." So the Lord relented and said, "Fine, give them the king that they want." So Samuel went out, he found Saul. Saul was a very handsome man, said he was taller than any others. They wanted him to fight their battles for them. So here's a man that looked good from the outside. The people wanted him, and what they ended up with was not a very good leader, was the problem. So Saul had some difficulties. Of course, he didn't follow the commands of the Lord. He didn't wipe out all the Amalekites. He's supposed to kill the men, women, children, the animals, everybody. We know that he left the animals alive. He also left the king alive. Disobeyed the word of the Lord. He also tried to perform sacrifices, which he was not permitted to do because he was a Benjaminite and not a Levite. So 2 things there. Lord ends up rejecting him, and Samuel is told to go find a new king. So that's where we're picking up this week, is Samuel is sent to find a new king. And this starts up in 1 Samuel 16. The Lord comes to Samuel and says, "Samuel, what are you still sitting around here for? You need to go out and you need to find a new king. Don't sit there sulking. It's time to find a new king." Of course, Samuel is a little bit concerned about what's going on here because he doesn't want to go out and find a new king right now. He tells the Lord, if I go to crown a new king, Saul will hear about it and Saul will kill me. Now you'll notice here, Samuel didn't say, "No, God, I'm not going to do this." All he did was he expressed, "Lord, if I leave, Saul's going to kill me." He just expressed his concern. He didn't say that he wasn't going to do it. He just telling the Lord his concern here. So it's not Samuel being disobedient here. It's just Samuel saying, if I do this, Saul will kill me. And the reason why he thought that was because, of course, Samuel was the prophet. His movements were known among the people and among Saul as well. He knew that if he set out somewhere to go crown a new king, Saul would hear about it. He didn't want Saul really to know that he was going out to crown a new king. So he asked the Lord, what should I do about this? And the Lord says, well, take an animal and go and say that you're going to go sacrifice. And that's what he does. He goes in and goes sacrifices. So the Lord directs him. Says, go down to Bethlehem. So Samuel takes his heifer, he goes down to Bethlehem, and immediately upon arriving in the city, the elders meet him. The elders are very concerned here, because here's Samuel, here is a judge, the former judge of Israel, the one who, delivers God's judgment, basically. He's coming into their city, and they want to know why. They're not certain what Samuel's going to do there, whether he's going to bring judgment on the city or what. You remember, right around this time, Samuel had just killed King Agag. Now, that's pretty clear in everybody's mind what just happened. I mean, he picked up a sword, cut off the guy's head. Everybody's taking Samuel pretty seriously right now. So the elders of Bethlehem meet him and say, Samuel, well, what's going on here? We're not in trouble, are we? And Samuel's like, no, I'm here to sacrifice this animal. Go consecrate yourselves. Because you remember, when during a sacrifice or any of the ceremonial events like this, they had to purify themselves. It involved like washing and possibly fasting or there's a whole process of consecration. So he told them to go do that. And among all the people that was there, he told Jesse to go consecrate himself and his family. So Jesse was invited to this sacrifice. So during the sacrifice, we're skipping down to point number 2 now, the anointing of David. During the sacrifice, what happens is Samuel knows that he is to anoint one of the sons of Jesse to be the new king. Now, Samuel's his awareness or his gauge of someone is basically the same gauge that we all have. I mean, we can look at somebody and our initial impression of them is, their appearance, how they hold themselves, what they look like, how they're dressed. I mean, that's just the initial impression that we get of people. Of course, God has a different view of people. He knows the heart of man. So what we see here at the first in 1 Samuel 16:6, it says Samuel first saw the children of Jesse here. They were coming in, and he saw Jesse's eldest son, Eliab, and he looks at him, and he says, surely this is the Lord's anointed. I mean, Eliab, oldest son, I mean, he must have been quite a spectacle, very handsome and well built. And I mean, again, it's your initial impression of somebody. If you're looking for a leader, that's probably what you're looking at. But the Lord says, no. I look at things differently than you do. And this isn't the guy. So all of Jesse's children parade before him, and the Lord says, no, none of these. And they get to the end of the line, and Samuel hasn't seen the person that he wants to see. So he turns to Jesse and says, Jesse, do you have another son? And Jesse says, well, there is one more. He's out in the field. He's watching the flocks. And Samuel says, go send for him. So he sends for him. And we'll pick up here. The first section we're going to read here is 1 Samuel 16:11 through 13. Let us see what that says here. It says, Then Samuel said to Jesse, are all of your sons here? And he said, there remains yet the youngest, but behold, he is keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, "Send and get him, for we will not sit down till he comes." And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, and had beautiful eyes, and was handsome. And the Lord said, "Arise, anoint him, for this is he." Then Samuel took the horn of oil, and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. And Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. So what happened here? Samuel saw David. It says he was ruddy in appearance. I made a note down there because, ruddy is one of those words that we don't use very often. So the definition that we get from the Oxford Dictionary is ruddy means a healthy red color, particularly in the face. So he was a healthy looking boy. He was very handsome. So he had beautiful eyes. Now, yes, those are outward appearance. I mean, this is what Samuel saw of him. But the Lord saw that in addition to what was on the inside. So the Lord knew his heart. The Lord knew this is the man that I have chosen to lead my people. So Samuel anoints him, and then he goes away. He says, from that time on, the Spirit of the Lord was with David. So in our next section here, kind of going on with the story of David, we have David meeting Saul for the first time. Now, it says in 1 Samuel 16:14, it says, "Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord tormented him." So, basically, after Saul had rejected, disobeyed God, the Lord had rejected him, and the Spirit of the Lord had left him. In that place, a tormenting spirit was sent by the Lord to torment Saul, and he had some difficulties. Talks about him prophesying, to himself, basically talking to himself, stark raving mad is what that was getting at. It's not, when it says prophesying there, it's not talking about saying the words of the Lord like a prophet would do. No, it's basically talking about he's rambling on. So a servant sees what's going on here with Saul and recommends, like, you should get somebody in here to play the harp for you, a skilled man that is good with the harp, and he would soothe your spirit to hear that. So Saul says, yeah, whatever, go fetch for me a man. Servant says, "Now I know a person," and this is in 1 Samuel 16:18. It says, "Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, a man of good presence, and the Lord is with him." Now you want to talk about the providence of the Lord. This is what's going on here. So the Lord has Samuel anoint David, and then just shortly thereafter, a servant of Saul says, "Amazing, I know a guy who's great with the harp. He's right over here, son of Jesse. You'll love this guy." And it's David. Now, if that's not God working, that's God working. So we'll just leave it with that. And it says David came and he played the harp, and when he played, Saul was refreshed. It says Saul loved David. Love there, of course, meaning that he liked him very much. He was welcome in the presence of Saul. He liked him so much that he made him his armor bearer. And here's another term that I defined here in our study guide. What is an armor bearer? The dictionary says an armor bearer is an officer selected by kings and generals because of their bravery, not only to bear their armor, but also to stand by them in time of danger. So this was, it's kind of an honor, really, to be appointed an armor bearer. I mean, that speaks of the person's bravery. They are to be seen with the king. It's quite a respectable position for David to be appointed into. It also meant that basically any time that Saul needed him to play the harp, that David would be present because he was his armor bearer. course, David was still a youth at this time. And as we go into the story of David and Goliath, we'll kind of see that here. We talk about Goliath. Goliath, of course, was a giant. And, in every sense of the word, he was a giant. It says Goliath was 6 cubits and a span long. Now, a cubit is measured from the tip of your elbow to the tip of your fingers. You don't see my crooked fingers up there. Sorry, I'm double jointed. That's about 18 inches. That's an average of the cubit size. Now, there are, depending on what culture you were in, or different cultures had different size cubits. But the standard here that we're going with is about 18 inches. So when it says he was 6 cubits and a span long, basically he was about 9 feet and 9 inches tall. Pretty big guy. It says Goliath came out and he challenged Saul and the armies of Israel, saying, send out somebody to fight me. And whoever wins, our army will be, subject to whatever the victor's whims are. That's what he wanted. Of course, when you're 9 feet tall and you're looking around at all the little people on the field, I mean, you're feeling pretty invincible at that point. And that's where Goliath was coming from. He didn't see anyone that could defeat him. Of course, the thing about it was, no one in Israel really saw anyone that could defeat him either. And the question gets brought up here. Saul was the king. Wasn't Saul the champion of the people? I mean, that's why they wanted him. Let's go back and look at 1 Samuel 8:19 through 20. And we'll see this a little clearer here. All right. It says, but the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, no, but there shall be a king over us, that we may be like all other nations, and that our king may judge us, and go out before us, and fight our battles. That's why they wanted a king. They wanted someone to go out before them and fight their battles. So Saul, you remember, Saul was head and shoulders above everyone else in the crowd. He was very handsome man of war, and that's kind of what he was. That was why that he was put up there as king. But now we see that Goliath is out there, a man that is much bigger than Saul. Everybody's afraid of him. Even Saul's afraid of him. He doesn't want to go out and fight. Saul is supposed to be their champion. Nah. Somebody else needs to volunteer for this job, because I'm not going to go out there and die to some 9-foot giant. So, we go forward here a little bit, and we see David coming into the camp. Jesse had sent David with, what does it say here? I'm going to get this right here. It says he was supposed to deliver rations of grain and bread to his brothers, and also 10 cheeses to the captain of their 1,000. So Jesse had sent these supplies with David to go out to the army to basically supply his brothers. Now, this was pretty common in that time, where families were supposed to support their own family inside the army, and they would also give gifts to other people there. And we see here the 10 cheeses go to the captain of their thousands. And that's how the Bible basically talks about leadership roles. Some were over thousands, some were over hundreds, some were over 10. Here, the 10 cheeses goes to the captain of David's brothers, group of 1,000 basically. So the question is, why wasn't David there? Well, David was, of course, Saul's armor bearer, and he was supposed to be with Saul. But Saul evidently permitted him to go back and forth between the presence of Saul and his father's house during this time. Well, why wasn't David with the army? Because it talks about David being, a man of war. Well, we get a little bit of clues here from the rest of the Old Testament. According to Numbers, when they were doing the census, it says every man over the age of 20 was supposed to be enlisted into the army. Was supposed to, that's when they were supposed to go into their service, was at 20. So David was probably under the age of 20, therefore he wasn't with the army. He was still a man, but he wasn't in the army yet. So, also we see here in 1 Samuel 17:33, one of Saul's reasons that David shouldn't go out and fight Goliath is because he is still a youth. Goliath is a man who has been a warrior since his youth. So, that's what we're looking at here. David wasn't with the army probably because he was too young. We can't nail down an exact age for him, but we can say with relative certainty that he was under 20 years of age. So David comes out. He gives his food to his brothers, and his brothers are jealous of him. He says, "Why are you here?" Basically, they start taunting him, here for glory or whatever, and it's like, look, what have I done wrong? I'm bringing you food. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And while he's talking, he hears Goliath out there taunting the armies of Israel. And David says, this is in 1 Samuel 17:26, he says, and David said to the men who stood by him, "What shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" Well, of course, right before that, they were going through everything that should have been done, that would be done for the person that would kill Goliath. Basically, he would be given a bunch of money, exempt from taxes, and he would be able to marry Saul's daughter. So, David says, okay, well, I'm going to go in and talk with Saul, and I'll go out and fight the guy. You remember, David was the armor bearer of Saul. So it was okay for him to go into the presence of Saul because he was his armor bearer. It would have been another, one of those things. Okay, well, that's what he's supposed to do. Again, we see here the providence of God. Why was he made an armor bearer at all? Well, it's for this purpose here, so he could enter into the presence of Saul, and the Lord can be shown as being, behind this whole thing. So let's pick it up here. We see here. Get my readings right here. Let's look at 1 Samuel 17:32 through 37. And here we have. It says, "And David said to Saul, 'Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go out and fight with this Philistine.' And Saul said to David, 'You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth.' But David said to Saul, 'Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear, and took a lamb from the flock, I went out and fought him, and struck him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and struck him, and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God.' And David said, 'The Lord, who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine.' And Saul said to David, 'Go, and the Lord be with you.'" Now, isn't that something? David's reasoning for wanting to go out is because he has mocked the armies of Israel, the armies of the living God. And his qualifications for being able to take care of Goliath is, well, I've killed a lion and a bear, while defending my father's flocks. But it's interesting here that he doesn't focus on him killing the lion and the bear. What he says here is, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear. He doesn't really take any credit for this. He says, the Lord did this for me. And if he delivered me from the lion and from the bear, well, he's going to deliver me from a giant that's defying the will of God. And Saul said, all right, fine, you can go. Let the Lord be with you. Now, we go down a little bit in the narrative, and we see where Saul tried to give David his armor. David puts it on. He really can't move in it. It's too heavy for him. And David's like, look, I don't need any of this. So what does he take into battle with him? He takes a staff, and he takes a sling. Now, staff, of course, is something that he would have while he was out tending the flocks, and so would be the sling. These were weapons of war, but they weren't like a sword and a shield. I mean, they weren't, the most high-tech weapons of war, I guess. Now, of course, you all know the story here of how David slew Goliath. And we're going to read about that just a little bit here. I want to, when I think about this story, I always go back to like my younger days in Bible school or Sunday school on Sunday morning, and you see all the little pictures of David, the little cartoony pictures about how he has a slingshot. And I've always pictured him having one of those, just the little forked slingshots, just a little stick with the two forks in it, with the rubber band in there, and he's there, and he's shooting, and this little pebble. It's not really what he had. Now, we can go back through antiquity and what we know of that time in history, and we know what kind of slings that they would have had. The size of the rock that he likely had was probably the size of a tennis ball. A rock size of a tennis ball, that's pretty dense, pretty heavy, and it's not going to fit into your little slingshot like that. The sling that he had, of course, was just a long piece of cloth with a pouch in the bottom of it. You sling it over your head and you fire it away. That missile that was coming out of there was probably left there about 100 miles an hour, and it struck him square in the forehead. Now, that is, when we think about this, Goliath is back there in full armor, a shield, and sword. It talks about how heavy all of Goliath's armor is. I mean, this man is ready for battle. And we see here David running up there, not even a part of the army, and all he has is a sling to face Goliath. What we see here is the Lord's power on display. The Lord saying, look, I can take care of Israel. I don't need thousands of men in the army to do this. I can take a boy and defeat a man of war like this without any injury coming to the boy. It's not even difficult for me. Just watch. See, he has a sling. There goes the rock, and then that's it. So let's read about this a little bit in 1 Samuel 17:43. And we pick up with the story, and it says, "And the Philistine said to David, 'Am I a dog that you come to me with a stick?' And the Philistines cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, 'Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field.' Then David said to the Philistine, 'You come to me with a sword and a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand.'" See, again, we see here David, he is not at all concerned with what he can do. He is saying, this day the Lord will give you into our hands, and it is the Lord who fights our battles. This is why it talks about David being a man after God's own heart, because he's acknowledging, he's like, there is nothing that I can do here. But you got to understand, I am a servant of the Most High God. The Lord fights for me. So your battle's with him, and I'm just going to kind of stand back here and let the Lord take care of this. And that's basically what happens here. Of course, we know the story. David takes his sling, shoots the rock. Rock hits him square in the forehead. Goliath falls over. David walks up to Goliath, picks up Goliath's sword, and severs his head. So, thus is the end of Goliath, and the Lord has fought for Israel. Now, an interesting thing here, right at the end of chapter 17, it says, Saul asks, whose son is this youth? Now, that happened down in 1 Samuel 17:55. And you ask, well, why did he ask that question? He knew who David was. Obviously, he was his armor bearer. He knew David. It says back there that that Saul loved David. Well, that is true. Though he may not have known the entire history of David, who was David's father, and what was his lineage and everything. This became very important because Saul had promised that whoever killed Goliath was going to marry his daughter. Now suddenly the family line of David became very important because Saul's family was going to now be joined with David, and Saul wanted to know what he was going to get into. So that's why he had mentioned that. All right. Now, that was all the good stuff that happened. Now we start seeing some of the bad stuff that's going to happen. Now, you remember, Saul, like we discussed, was going to be the champion of Israel. He was the king. He was the one that was supposed to lead their armies. He was the one that was going to get all the glory and the honor and the praise of the people because he was the king. But now David has come on the scene. Saul wasn't able to defeat Goliath because the Lord wasn't with him, but David did. So now what was going to happen? Well, David was set up. He was made a general. He was sent out to fight many battles, and everywhere that David went, David was he was extremely victorious over whatever enemy that he fought. And thus the saying came, and we'll see this a couple times in 1 Samuel, where it says, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Now, what we get from that is not that David actually killed 10,000 people. It's basically that David has killed many more people than Saul has killed, and more glory and honor should go to David. And that's kind of how Saul saw that, was that the people were revering David now and not him, and that was his place was to be the place of the warrior. So now we're starting to run into some difficulties. Saul's starting to resent David. Talks about a tormenting spirit came upon Saul. Saul, of course, has David come in to play his harp for him, and Saul gets in his head, well, I can just kill David right here. So he picks up his spear, and it says twice he threw his spear at David and missed him. And missed him. I mean, David hasn't done anything wrong to Saul, but Saul has, is now attacking him. I have down here 1 Samuel 18:12. We can look at that just for a second. It says, Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. Saul knew what was going on here. He knew that the Lord was with David, that the Lord had left him. The Lord had now anointed David. David was now his representative. But Saul was very resentful. He wanted to kill David so he could keep the kingship, the glory for himself. So Saul basically spent the next little while, pursuing David. David would slip away. Saul would pursue him again. David would, find some way to get out of it. And we're going to discuss those a little bit, but we're now falling into a pattern here where Saul's jealousy toward David is now making him lash out. He's taken that to the next level. He is trying to kill David. Of course, the good note in all of this is Jonathan. Now, Jonathan was one of Saul's sons, and Jonathan was a warrior in his own right. The story of Jonathan, I mean, it talks about him scaling up the side of a cliff with just his armor bearer with him. Just those two go into the middle of a Philistine camp, and he slaughters, a bunch of people and gets away alive. And it's just the two of them. I mean, he's quite the man of war himself. But Jonathan loved David. I mean, they were as close as brothers. 1 Samuel 20 describes the love that they had for one another. And David didn't really understand what was going on with Saul. It's like, he's trying to kill me. Jonathan explains to him that, look, Dad's mad at you, I think. Before you come back into his presence, let me kind of get a gauge of what his attitude really is toward you. And it says, Jonathan told David, I want you to go out there and hide. Just hide in the wilderness there. And I will send you a message. Whether it's okay to come into the camp and meet with Saul, and whether everything's going to work out, or whether you just need to flee. It says, this is in 1 Samuel 20 through 22, he says, I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I shot at a mark. And behold, I will send the boy, saying, go find the arrows. If I say to the boy, look, the arrows are on this side of you, take them. Then you are to come, for as the Lord lives, it is safe for you, and there is no danger. But if I say to the youth, look, the arrows are beyond you, then go, for the Lord has sent you away. And of course, what happens? Jonathan goes in, he talks to his father. Saul is outraged because he sees the love that Jonathan has for David, and he calls him all sorts of things, says that he has betrayed his mother's nakedness, and by siding with David, basically siding with David against his own family there. So, Saul understands that there's this relationship of, kind of brotherly love between Jonathan and David, and he doesn't approve of it. Of course, Jonathan, for his part, he goes back out, shoots his arrows, and he tells the boy, go out further. The arrows are beyond you. And David understands that he is to flee. Of course, after that scene happens, we have the boy going back inside, Jonathan and David kind of meeting out in the wilderness, and crying on each other's shoulders, and basically saying that the Lord has joined myself and you together, and our households together, and that'll be for all time. So, well, gosh, I actually have it written down here. It's 1 Samuel 20:42. It says, Then Jonathan said to David, Go in peace, because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, The Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever. So, you can see there's this bond here that Jonathan is able to save David. David, for his part, he doesn't do anything wrong. I mean, he's nothing but the servant of the king. And he's very confused as to why Saul is doing this to him. The next section we have here, we talk about how David spares Saul's life not once but twice. First time it happened, it says Saul set out with 3,000 men to find David in the wilderness of En-Gedi. It says Saul went into a cave to relieve himself, basically to go to the bathroom. So he goes inside this dark cave, he leaves his men outside, he goes into a cave to go to the bathroom, and David and his men are hiding in this cave. So Saul's over there, he's relieving himself, and David's men says, here Saul, the Lord has delivered you into his hand, or delivered him into your hand. Go kill him and let this be an end. You're the king, you're the anointed king. Go do it. So David gets up, he walks over to Saul very silently, and gets close enough to Saul that he's able to take his knife and cut off a part of his robe. Without Saul even knowing it, cuts off part of his robe. And he goes back to his men and says, "The Lord forbid that I should do anything to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed." Now, what David's saying here is, Saul is the anointed of God to be the king. He understands that, Samuel did in fact anoint Saul, that Saul is on the throne because the Lord had him there. He is not going to do anything against Saul because he knows that Saul is the Lord's anointed. Despite everything that Saul's doing to him, David is the better man here, basically. So, I want to read, this is kind of a long section here, but I want to read it to you because it kind of brings the whole context of this together. It's 1 Samuel 24, 8 through 22. And it says, after I take a drink of water here, "Afterward, David arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, 'My lord the king.' And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth and paid homage. And David said to Saul, 'Why do you listen to the words of other men say? Or the words of men who say, Behold, David seeks your harm. Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand. For by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. As the proverb of the ancients say, out of the wicked comes wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? After whom do you pursue? After a dead dog? After a flea? May the Lord therefore be judge and give sentence between me and you, and see to it and plead my case and deliver me from your hand." As soon as David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I have repaid you evil. And you have declared this day how you have dealt with me, and that you did not kill me when the Lord put me into your hands. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safe? So may the Lord reward you with good that you have done for me this day. And now behold, I know that you shall surely be king, and the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Swear to me, therefore, by the Lord, that you will not cut off my offspring after me, and that you will not destroy my name out of my father's house." And David swore this to Saul. And Saul went home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. Now that's an interesting little section there, and I wanted to read that because it really shows the heart of those men. David there is saying, the Lord gave you into my hand. I spared you because you are the Lord's anointed. Saul, for his part, it says Saul wept, and he ended up going away because he saw that David was more righteous than he. Now, problem there is, that didn't stick with Saul. Saul ends up listening to the other men again. It's like, oh, David's trying to take your throne, and let's go and kill him, and that's, we repeat this scenario again. But we see here the heart of David in saying, the Lord be your judge and our judge between what's happening between us, because I haven't done anything to you, yet you seek to kill me. So that's we really need to see that David here is kind of he is the innocent person in this whole affair. Saul's seeking after him basically because Saul's jealous of him. Second time says Saul set out with another 3,000 men to find David in the wilderness of Ziph. While Saul was sleeping, says David came down to the camp, found Saul, and his men implored him. I think he only had one person with him at that time. He said, there he is. He's out here again. He's trying to kill you. The Lord has delivered you or him into your hand. Just kill him and be done with this. And David again says, I'm not going to do it. He says, but David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? And David said, as the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him, or his day will come to die, or he will go down into battle and perish. What's going on here is David understands it's not his place to do anything to Saul. The Lord will take care of Saul. And whether it's just Saul will eventually die, whether he will perish in battle, or the Lord will strike him down miraculously somehow. It doesn't matter how it happens. David is not going to be part of it because he doesn't want to have that guilt on his hands. Now it says David took Saul's spear and also the jug of water that was by his head. They went over to a nearby hill and then called down to the camp and said, see, I've been in the camp again. I have your spear. I have your water. I didn't kill you. Why are you chasing me? I am not treasonous. I'm not trying to kill you or take anything from you. I am your servant. And again, Saul relents like, oh yes, David, I'm sorry. You are my servant. And it's just a constant cycle over and over and over again. Of course, Saul continues down his spiraling downhill. Going back a little bit, Samuel died. Samuel, of course, was the one that was appointed the kings, and he was the judge of Israel. He dies back in 1 Samuel 25. And, Bible doesn't really make that big of a deal out of it. It just says he died. David went down to mourn. But Samuel was dead. And then it says the Philistines gathered an army to attack the armies of Israel. And Saul needed to know what was going to happen. He wanted to consult the Lord and get the Lord's blessing to defend Israel. So he goes to the Lord. Lord ignores him, doesn't answer him, and that's a big problem. So Saul is kind of at the end of his rope because Samuel's not around to ask. The Lord's not responding to him. He has to figure out what to do with this battle. So what does he do? He inquires of a witch. Now, witchcraft is, as it always has been, an abomination to God. Saul knew that, and there were laws established, basically, that had driven all the mediums and the spiritualists and everybody out of the land under penalty of death. Saul orders his servant to go out and find one. He ends up finding one. Saul disguises himself. They go over to meet with this woman, and she says, well, I'm not a witch. Saul made that illegal, and I'm not going to do it. And Saul says, don't worry about it. Nothing's going to happen. So she says, all right. Let's go ahead to do her little seance and summon forth a spirit. And the spirit she summons forth is Samuel. And it says Saul perceives that the spirit is Samuel and falls down before him. And Saul says, wait a minute here. Why did you summon me up? It says, if the Lord's not answering you, why are you talking to me? It's like, you disobeyed the Lord. You tried to do the sacrifices by yourself. You aren't the king anymore. These Philistines will overrun you, and you're going to die. Well, I guess he didn't pronounce his death sentence there, but he said, you're going to lose the battle. So Samuel told Saul, he said the Lord had rejected him and he would be defeated. Now the question is, how was Samuel summoned up? This witch, she summoned him up from the dead. Now, I don't believe that people can do that. And I think that is, very a demonic thing that we can't deal with. And obviously, if Samuel, prophet of God, he's going to be in heaven, right? Well, he's not going to be able to, witch not going to be able to summon somebody like that. Kind of confusing thing. What I'm going to go with here is that the Lord permitted that to happen. That, it wasn't that she'd summoned him up on her own, that the Lord had basically allowed Saul to talk to Samuel right there. Now, Saul, for his part, he consulted with the witch. You can see that downward spiral. This man doesn't have much time left. He has obviously just rejected everything that the Lord stands for, and he's just, he's out on his own right now. But yeah, the Lord had to allow Samuel to actually speak with Saul. Otherwise, that would not have happened at all. Fast forward back, of course, it talks about Saul and his sons, Jonathan included, in 1 Samuel 31. They were killed in battle. It said the Philistines came down and assaulted Israel. Saul went up and tried to defend. The army was being defeated. Israel retreats. Jonathan and his brothers were all killed in the retreat, and Saul himself is actually injured by an arrow. And he says, he turns to his armor bearer and says, "Kill me. Now, don't let the uncircumcised Philistines have me. Just kill me." His armor bearer he wouldn't do it. So Saul took his own sword, put it out, and he fell on it and died. Philistines find Saul. They end up cutting off Saul's head, stripping him of his armor, and they go paraded around their cities and end up putting his armor in their temples. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago, where when the ark was captured, they put it in their temples because that was the sign of their gods had prevailed over another land's gods. This is kind of like their trophy house. They took Saul's armor because they had prevailed over Saul, and obviously that meant that their God was superior to Saul. So that's what we see here with the end of Saul and his line, basically. Right now, we end up at the end of this chapter with Israel doesn't have a king anymore. Saul's dead, all of his sons are dead, so there needs to be found a new king. And we'll pick up with that next week, where we talk about how David, is the king. But before we end today, we need to talk about what lesson we learned from today's story. And I think the biggest lesson, of course, we have all the lessons that we've learned previously, and we see examples of it this week about God's providence, trusting in God, doing what He says, and you'll be accepted. If you don't, well, you're kind of out on your own, and that's not a good place to be. The real story here, or the real lesson that we learn here, and it's kind of a new one, is that God uses the meek and humble for His purposes. He doesn't use the rich and the mighty. And there's a reason for that. It's not saying that He can't. It's like in this story, He did, though. It's because when you're meek and humble, you acknowledge that there is nothing that you can do that will make a difference. Everything is the Lord's. And the Lord, if you trust in Him, the Lord's going to do what He wants to do, and you are just His servant, that you basically, you bathe in what the Lord has provided, or bask in the Lord, what the Lord has provided. When, the richer and mightier you are, you can still have a pure heart at that point. The Bible, says, Jesus talks about it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. What that's saying is, once you have that kind of power and authority here on earth, you're much less submissive to God in general. That's the perception there. And that's what we see here. God uses a shepherd, the son of a shepherd, to be the king of all of Israel, because David is constantly saying, it's the Lord that does this. It's the Lord that allows that. And I'm not going to do anything against the Lord. It's because he acknowledges that the Lord is in control of everything. He used a meek and humble shepherd who had no power, had no right to anything, to be the king of his people, because he acknowledged that the Lord is the Lord and He will do what He wants to do. So that's the what we really need to get out of this story is it's not us, it's the Lord. So trust in Him, and all things will work together for good. Romans 8:28 again. That's where we're going to end it this week. So next week, come back. We're going to continue talking about David, and then we'll get into Solomon the week after that. So hope you join us here next time. Up until then, I encourage you to go start reading your Bible. New Year's a great new time to start a reading plan. Read the Bible in a year, read the Bible in 6 months. There's all kinds of reading plans out there, all kinds of Bibles that will take you through the Bible, tell you exactly what you need to read every day. So I encourage you to go ahead and start that, because it will definitely be of a benefit to your life. So until next time, have a good week, and join us back here next Thursday. So have a good one.